Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to view The Brothers Grimm, currently available on HBO Max for I don't know however long. We'll figure that out when we get to it. With how everything seems to be unsure about where Warner Brothers is heading with things. So, the first thing that I thoroughly enjoy about this film that normally I would complain everywhere else, I like that we go on and we have several Easter eggs in here that tie into the fantasy theme, giving us Hansel and Gretel, the gingerbread man, Cinderella briefly, just any cluster of certain references that are really to tie into old stories like Little Red Riding Hood and just so on and so forth. I thoroughly enjoyed that on top of a story that I thought was a really interesting and fun journey. You can also say that really this movie is to really just be supernatural with a time period piece attached to it. So, for those of you who, of course, thoroughly enjoy the CW show Supernatural, you can also like Brothers Grimm, because it's almost the same thing. So, with that said, teeing it up, what is this movie about? So, it seems that at first we have both Will and Jacob, who are to try to turn around their poverty lives to go on to be these performers that are to give people this horror show. As it seems the two of these people are to be the only ones in this world who can go on and fight these supernatural entities, but come to find out that these supernatural entities, at first, aren't really real. It's just a song and dance, so that way both Will and both Jacob could go on and collect money from these people without them being the wiser. But then we have both Will and Jacob, after doing all of these pretend hauntings and collecting all of this money, both Will and Jacob meet with a man named Della Tom, who is to mention them a case about several children who have gone missing, and both Will and both Jacob are to now want to go on and be forced to go into this investigation, realizing that this time around, this investigation is real. So, now that the two of them are forced into this real situation, because everything else has been a performance since then, I guess we really get to the Captain America, the First Avenger line, where when Captain America is to free all the prisoners, and they're turning to Steve and asking him, it's like, well, hey, like, what are you gonna do now? And Captain America turns to them and he says, like, well, like, I've done several performances where I've punched Adolf in the jaw hundreds of times, and so, like, I think I can go on and fight against these Germans. And so, whereas pretend is to be an experience, both Will and Jacob are to realize that their skills may help them with this legitimate scenario, and as well as stepping in and wanting to try to do the right thing to save a number of women who are all to be placed within these coffins before a blood moon is to arise. So, with that said, that mostly tees up most of this film. Like, to me, like, this also did have some, like, Pirates of the Caribbean kind of flavor to it. Like, I don't know who directed that and then went on to direct Pirates of the Caribbean. Um, but I don't know, to me, like, there was something about it that just felt like not only did we have actors from that movie in this film, but yeah, like, it just felt like the style was like that. So, with that said, this movie, HBO Max, check it out if you'd like to. I enjoyed it. The grading of this movie, I honestly would say that it's okay. Um, I like the dark and grittiness about it more so than other people. People would probably say that this movie is dumb or they hated it, and I could understand, but I liked this film. I just did. Um, Really, this is better than some other films that try to go on and be like this, like the Jeremy Renner Hansel and Gretel film, or just any number of those kind of fantasy films where they're trying too hard, and it obviously feels that way, where they're trying to revolutionize the characters, and it just comes off as like, eh. Also, some people may not know there is another show called Grimm with 1M, and would recommend people go on it and check that out also. Uh, because it kind of like in some ways it is a fantasy movie, a fantasy show. It's a show. Uh, Definitely check that out. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and so yeah. With that said, let's just go on into that double five because it's about that time again to just go on to spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time to spoil this movie. I want to apologize because more than likely right now as well as yesterday, like I was just feeling under the weather by the time that I was to try to do videos, and then also I was just kind of like, I don't know how I feel today. Um, so hopefully we're gonna get this out. So with that said, in the very beginning of this film, we have Will, who is with his mother and sister. And this is to be like when Will is very young, as well as the rest of his family. So this is kind of a like some time is going to pass somewhere in this film. So Will is desperately just breaking off this rocking horse, so that way they can just have wood for the fire, because of course they're just kind of running out of resources. And so Will's mother is hoping that Jacob is going to make his way home to give money for the cow, so that way they can bring this girl to the doctors because she is sick. So Jacob comes home, and Will is immediately asked. Jacob's like, well, hey, where's the money for the cow? And Jacob instead is to mention to Will that he has seeds instead. They're magical beans. And so Will throws the beans off to the side and is like, you've got to be kidding me. And so sadly enough, their daughter, or both Will and Jacob's sister, dies, and we have to assume. And so we then turn around, and a number of years later, both of these men are riding off into this town. So we have Will and we have Jacob, who make their way to, at some point, meet with the mayor of this town, and it seems that there is to be this witch with inside this one. It looks like a barn to me. And so while that story is going on, it seems that there is also going to be a story that Jacob writes down, and it is to somehow tie to the Red Riding Hood story, which he ends up calling it the Red Riding Cape, which isn't the same thing. So Jacob and Will are to hear these people out, and he's to tell them like, well, hey, we're gonna go on and we're gonna eliminate this case as we've gone on and done this a number of times. So Will and Jacob go on and take this guy. I believe he's the old Miller. So is what his name is in IMDb. So they both Will and Jacob go on and put on this goofy looking armor that also the old Miller is to put on as well. And they give him a shield that is supposed to protect him. Because they're going on and saying that the armor that they're putting on is to have a certain magical protection or is to be enchanted somehow, which isn't really the truth. So both Will and Jacob are going into the location the witch is supposed to be in, and so immediately once they hear this witch cackle, they start to look in one direction, and she is not in that direction. They turn to eventually face her, and so what happens at first is we have these characters going on and realizing that normal weapons seem to not be able to work on this witch. As Will is to try to put this cross, the cross catches on fire, and so they drop it. Come to find out that this cross is to really just be a thing that like douses itself on fire consistently, even by accident. So Will and Jacob are starting to go on and turn the guns and crossbow, or gun and crossbow, towards one another, and they are trying to motivate themselves to not kill one another and just be like, we're the brothers Grimm, like, come on. Like, we can't do this. And so we have them go on to figure out how to shoot this witch with this arrow of this crossbow and take this witch out. Supposedly she vanishes and turns into a plethora of snakes, and when the old Miller is to look on, the guys are telling him to look back because the witch is trying to get away. Sure she is. So both Will and both Jacob are to have another case be solved. And so when Will and Jacob are to leave this guy to say, hey, yeah, like we solved the case, go on home and or go on to the mayor and get us our payment, all of a sudden we start to see that there, of course, is to be Hidlick and Bunst, who are to be both men who have worked side by side with Willem and Jacob to put the whole ruse of this case together, to have Widlick like take off his witch mask, and is to mention it's like, well, hey, why do we need smoke? Why can't I just give you a really good performance and this and that? So like, well, like, oh well. So they're possibly also thinking about the next time around what their next case will be, and so both Will and both Jacob are telling these men to go on to the next town, and both of them will go on and stay. Plus, also, Widlick is to be upset how consistently, like, the both of them have to go on and do all the work, where, like, these guys just have to ride into town every time. So Will and Jacob are to go into this bar and are to celebrate their payment. And Will is trying to go on and find his way into a number of women's skirts, while Jacob, of course, is to uh, be talking about wise tales about an imp that they had to figure out his name, and just going on and just doing all these songs and rumors and whatever. So all of a sudden, while the both of these two characters are to be in this bar, the bar is to have another person, another patron, who is to also be Cavaldi, who is to also realize that he is going to go on and arrest the two of these brothers Grimm to then bring them in to put them up on charges. So, Cavaldi is to bring in the brothers Grimm and arrest them, and come to find out the reason of them doing that is that Cavaldi was to take both of the brothers Grimm's two other sidekick men and torture them and have like snails in glass boxes covering their heads to try to get information out of these men. And so Cavaldi is to now realize that the brothers Grimm are carn artists and that they should be put on charges of uh, fraudulent theft and robbery, and so we have Delatombe, who is going on and eating this unusual meal that this woman had go on and prepared, and he's like, what am I even eating here? So Delatombe is to mention that these two men are to be brought up on charges, and that will lead them to be killed, to be put to death. So Delatombe is to mention to the brothers Grimm that there is possibly another unusual case that he might take them on to, and that, of course, is to be a story about a number of girls who have all gone missing. 9 to be exact at the moment, but there will be 12. And we'll figure out why. So, both Will and Jacob go on to make it to this town to find out that, yes, children are going missing. And so the brothers Grimm end up meeting a guy named Gregor who has a daughter called Sasha, who the brothers Grimm end up easily mistaking for a son. That's where the joke that I kind of wanted to say is a son, but technically it's a daughter, because Gregor is to go on and say it's like, she's my daughter. And then like, oh yeah, fine wife that she'll make some lad. It's like, whoops. Because Sasha's hair is so short that they mistake her for a man or a boy. So they go on and they are to find out that Sasha is to tell the tale of what is going on within the woods. And come to find out there was a tower within this woods that was to seem very much like if you guys were ever to watch the movie Tangled, or of course hear the story about Esmeralda, the girl who was to be up in the huge tower, and she would have her hair be so long that she could drop her hair down to come as a rope. That somehow is going to play into the story at some point. So the brothers Grimm are going to try to make this tower and find it, but they need a guide to get there. And so the only person that they could think to have justifyingly be a guide is to, of course, be a Angelica, a woman who is to be cursed or scorned or whatever by the whole entire town, where every time they end up saying her name, they have to all spit all at once. And once the Brothers Grimm meet with this woman, they spit too. Because this woman is to obviously not be nice, but that is because most of the town doesn't like her anyways, and so why would she now all of a sudden become a people person? So the Brothers Grimm go on to meet with Angelica to persuade her to go on this quest, and it takes some doing, but at some point she decides to go on with the Brothers Grimm to guide them into this forest. So, oddly enough, we have Angelica at one point who needed to go on and lick a frog or lick a toad in this case, and then kiss it to figure out where they were going to lead them back to the horses when they were to go in one direction, but then they realized, like, okay, we need to get back to the horses. Because Angelica was to have these guys ride to a certain location, drop all of their horses, and then continue on foot. Really just because the woods continues to adjust itself. And so, like, they're much better off just going by foot. So, we have a character, I believe, called the King here, who is to be like the werewolf kind of character in this story. Who he, of course, goes on, or no, wait, the Woodsman. My bad, Woodsman. The Woodsman is to be this wolf slash man character, and so Woodsman is to be Angelica's father, but we'll get to that. But so they go further into this woods to make it all the way to this tower, and so at some point there of course is to be this woodsman, and all of the trees are to also go on and start grabbing onto Cavaldi's men and start to drag them into their deaths. And Cavaldi is to be so freaked out. So, really, when it comes down to it, the deaths of Cavaldi's men are to really just be tied to the Brothers Grimm. And so when the guys make their way from the tower to make it back into town, we have Delatombe, who goes on and puts the Brothers Grimm and Angelica into this torture room to have them die soon. As Cavaldi and the Brothers Grimm is to have this weird, goofy story that leads them to say that there are big, massive men that are to be in the woods, and that's how things happen the way they did. And if the Brothers Grimm just have one more chance at this, they'll go on and they'll take down these men and they'll solve this case. Which somehow Delatombe lets them go on and solve this case, but leaves them on a very short leash. So, the Brothers Grimm go on back into the forest to make it back to this tower, and so they bring a catapult And so Will is thinking, of course, about how this is like a real case, and how when they were going through and getting attacked by these trees, they're like, man, like, this has to be on tracks, right? Like, this all has to be some kind of setup, right? Will was looking for, like, the magic trick. He was trying to look for the answer of how they did it, how they were pulling it off, and how these people have more money than they do. So, but Will was to finally relent that this case could be way more dangerous, and that this mission could be a suicide mission. And Will and Jacob are deciding to still go on with this anyways, because Jacob is, it seems, to have been shot off into this catapult. Will is to check on Jacob to see if he's okay, and come to find out that the thing that was to be fired off in this catapult, who Will thought was Jacob, it was actually just some dummy, and he was like, oh, okay. So they needed to test the catapult to see if they could figure out a way to to uh, get to the tower. And so they go on and they realize that, well, maybe all they need is some rope with a hook on it, and they could just climb their way up. So we also had a moment in town where late at night there was a horse that had, by the Woodsman, gotten spiders in its mouth. That's why I wanted to mention the Woodsman, and I almost forgot about this scene. When the characters were to have gone on and made their way back to the horse, the Woodsman had infected one of the horses with these spiders to make it crazed. And so one of the horses goes on and is to cackle and say the word "save me," to have all of a sudden this one kid hearing this horse consistently saying the word "save me." And we come to find out that when this kid checks on this horse, the horse then is to have in its mouth some spider webbing that is to consistently attach further and further onto this kid, to where the horse just takes the kid and is to fling him up into the air, or fling her up into the air and consume this kid, to where both Will and Jacob run off into the night hearing what is to go on, and they realize that there is to be a girl inside this horse's mouth, because of course this was Jacob's horse. And so, like, okay, this seems very unusual, but like, with everything that has happened, everything is unusual. So now we have to go on and cover what happens in town. So we have Sasha, who is supposed to be the 12th girl within her being placed into this coffin, and we figure that out because Jacob is to use this rope to hook himself on this tower and figure out a way to rope up it, with Will, who is kind of using this thing to kind of consistently adjust to help Jacob get up this tower. So Jacob uses this rope to fling himself into this window, to then see this old woman in this bed. Not really sure if this woman is alive or not. And so Jacob is to look into this mirror and is to notice this much younger woman, who is of course to be this witch. And every time that Jacob goes on and doesn't look at the mirror and looks at the old woman, he's like, oh my god. So Jacob realizes that he should not look at this woman. And so Jacob, who of course is very afraid, is to, instead of grabbing the rope, he grabs the Mirror Queen's hair and slings himself down off the tower and rips uh, the Queen Mirror's hair. So we consistently have the Queen who is consistently asking if she is the fairest one of all, as we had gone on and had both Will and Jacob mentioning about that, when I guess that is a game that they play with women. So Jacob is to also see this drawing in this paper, and he is starting to connect what is happening here. As what happens in town is we have Sasha and we have Angelica, who are to have Sasha, who is by this well, and all of a sudden Sasha is to drag this raven or this crow from out of this well and pick it up and realize that this crow or this bird is dead. Come to find out it's not. All of a sudden this bird starts smacking with its wings and tossing all this mud onto Sasha's face. Now all of a sudden Sasha is to try to wipe away her face of this mud, of this dirt, to then realize some portions of her face are also falling off. That her eyes have fallen off, her nose have fallen off, her lips have fallen off. And all of a sudden, we now have this mud creature that is to have all of these things upon its face, as we continue to now have Angelica realizing, like, hey, like, I need to protect this kid, and I now have to fight against this, what will be Gingerbread Man. As this Gingerbread Man is to grab Sasha from this house, to take her and consume her, and then run away as if being the Gingerbread Man, and going into this well. So, both Will and Jacob realize that the girl that is in this coffin is to be the 12th girl, because Jacob is to realize when he was so high onto the roof of this tower, he realizes that there is a number of coffins that are placed throughout this whole entire location circularly. So Jacob figures it out, and so it's to realize that the blood moon is to be the way of which that they need to go on and collect all these women into all these coffins. And both Will and Jacob collect the 12th girl and take her with them back to town, and Rigor, who is Sasha's father, is to realize that this girl is not breathing bizarrely. So we finally have Delatome, who at this point is to just write off both Will and Jacob, and is to kill both of their accomplices. And at this point, they just want these characters to burn at the stake, because we just naturally assume at this point that these guys are frauds, and this is to be another one of their tricks. And desperately, we have the two of these characters that are wanting to solve this case, and Delatome is to put them in the forest and let them burn, as Delatome is to tell either one of these men, if they were to try and run away, there will be no town that won't get burned to the ground, or there'll be no person that Delatome won't go through to get to them, and there is going to be no place for them to hide, metaphorically speaking. So with that said, Delatome is to now take these men and put them on ladders, stack them together, tie them up, and burn them, as well as put cannons to this forest. So, come to find out, we realize who the 12th person will be, and it's an adult this time, as we have Angelica, who is to realize that the wolf was her father. And so Angelica is to go into the forest desperately trying to find her father again. And when she goes on and does that, she realizes that her father is cursed because he is to go on and tell her a story about him going on to be left in this cold-like environment, and it seems that the only one that was going to save her, save the Woodsman, was this witch. And so she ends up cursing him by stabbing him to the heart with this piece to keep him alive, but that also transforms him into this wolf who has to go on and do what the witch wants. So Angelica is to realize that she needs the help of the Brothers Grimm to break her father's curse, and so she finds them and cuts them down and has them run off to possibly solve this case. But while doing that, Angela ends up becoming the 12th person by having her at one point be put into this water, have the water be frozen, and Jacob is trying to break the ice, and when finally he does, Angelica has already been dragged under this water to now go on and be in the 12th coffin. We have the witch who is to realize, oh my god, the 12th girl has been found, and so all of a sudden she starts to revive herself, realizing that it's going to be soon, that she is going to become young again. So now we again have both Will and both Jacob, who realize that they need to go on and fight this witch and try to break this whole thing. Curse everything, try to prevent what is happening. So this time around, it seemed at first were going to use like the hair hook again, but instead it seems they go on and use the catapult that I guess this time around works perfectly. So they go on to get into the tower where they face off against this witch, and because Jacob arrives first, and then, or no wait, what happens is I think Jacob ends up getting catapulted into the tower, and then Will ends up grabbing on this rope and is to climb his way up the tower while Jacob is still attached to the rope. So, because Jacob is to try to fight this witch with this sword, and he ends up getting stuck to this wall. So, when Will tries to get up there, he immediately grabs for this sword also, and all of a sudden we now have both Jacob and we have both Will, who are consistently at odds with one another, almost desperately needing to stab one another to kill one another off here. And it just gets to the point where they're rustling between one another, and Will tells Jacob that he's the best of both of them, and that Will accept being stabbed by this sword for Jacob to possibly go on and defeat this witch. So, Jacob stabs himself, and so the witch is to tell Jacob that she can revive his brother within this mirror. And so they play around with the fact that it seems that the witch can seduce Will. And so when the woodsman comes back to this tower, he then goes on and is to have all these birds fly him up to this window as Angelica is to look on as her father flying up to this, or no, as God, who was it who was chasing down, because Angela is to be stuck in that coffin. Maybe it was Cavaldi. Yeah, it might have been Cavaldi was looking on, because I know Cavaldi is kind of like somehow attached by the end of this, and he has like the armor and so on and so forth, and he's like, well, hey, can I keep the armor because it saved my life? So we have the witch who decides to take that metal piece that was stabbed into the woodsman and pulls it out of him to get a much younger king, which ends up being Will, and stabs into him and revives Will. So we're assuming it was going to be brother against brother, but that never happens. So what Jacob ends up doing to figure out how to solve this case is, because everything is to be tied to this mirror, and how Jacob is consistently say to not look at it, Jacob then decides to break this mirror, which starts breaking the witch into pieces, and to where she starts falling, or the beauty of her starts falling off. So at some point when they go on to take a big chunk of this mirror and have it fall and be broken, that is, of course, when the witch is to be no more, regardless of the blood moon. So all the coffins end up getting reopened, the spell is to be broken, and so Jacob goes on to unstab Will with this metal piece, and Jacob is to go on and not only kiss Angelica, because it's supposed to be a true love kiss, and Angelica wakes up. We then have Jacob, who is to now see Will laying there, and since Cavalli had gone on and told Jacob to have true love's kiss wake up Angelica, they're thinking that this is possibly going to work for Will, and Will turns to Jacob and is like, not you. And so Jacob's like, oh, well, Angelica, yeah, like, how about you go over here and you kiss Will and maybe wake him up. So Will kisses Angelica, and so Will is not dead somehow. I guess his wounds was to somehow heal because magic. So by the end of this movie, since everybody is to have their children back, the whole town is to really just be happy, to where everybody is just kind of dancing around. And so Angelica is telling the Brothers Grimm that they are always welcome here. And so really by the end of this, like, everybody is just having like this happy-go-lucky good time. And Delator, or Delatome, let's cover that. Delatome with Cavaldi was to go on and track down the Brothers Grimm at this tower and try to kill them themselves. And what happened is that the Brothers Grimm was to have this enchanted axe that they realized that all of the forest could not get closer to the brothers Grimm as they were to have this axe. And so half of the time they were going on and using this to try to get out of the woods in certain portions of this film because of this enchanted axe that the Woodsman originally had, and he would throw it, and then it would be like Thor's hammer, it would like come back to him oddly. So even at one point where Jacob was to use the axe to chuck it, to have it come back and stab into the guy that he was supposed to fight. So with Delatome. So Will was to go on and fight Delatome, and Will just had this this flag with this stick, and so Will goes on and fights Delatome, and Delatome is just kind of playing with Will, and we do have a moment where it seems that Delatome is going to kill Will here, but then Will goes on and uses this this flag and stabs into Delatome, killing him here. And we have Delatome who's to realize that all that he really wanted was a certain meal, and so he falls over. So, but I think that ends up covering most of the film, like stuff that I probably forgot about, because I'm sure that there's probably a lot of it, because there's probably a lot of details that kind of go into this film. But I had fun with this movie. Some people may not like it, some people may not care about it. I enjoyed it. For me, it's just a fun kind of supernatural fantasy movie. Just kind of have like fun watching. So I would definitely recommend, if people have HBO Max, go on to check this movie out. I would definitely thumbs up this film. So with that said, let's just go on and go out of our way to say goodbye, everybody. Oh, the Cinderella reference. There was a point in time where both Will and Jacob were cleaning up where Cavalli was staying. And so there's a moment where they're bizarrely in these bonnet and maid clothes, and that was just kind of this brief thing where the guy turns to them and calls them Cinderella, and I guess that's where we get Cinderella from, and so that's the reference there. So with that said, yeah, I'm just gonna go on and get out of here. Oh, there was also a moment when Jacob was to mention about the magic beans while he was sleeping, and that the magic beans will go on and grow these beanstalks and go on and have giants come down and kill Will, as Will is to go on and consistently remind Jacob about the whole beans story consistently, to say how dumb Jacob is, or to really just make Jacob consistently look bad whenever Jacob is to go and seem smart, especially when he mentions about children's tears, trying to defeat certain monsters like the witch in the beginning of this film, and to be all technical or be smarter than Will, and then Will turns around and be like, yeah, but that bean story, the whole thing about the magic beans. So yeah, with that said, I think everything is covered. I think I kind of did all the little details kind of by the end of this. So with that said, goodbye everybody. Goodbye everybody.